welcome to another edition of Byte Club. Byte Club is the semi-regular podcast series where we interview the best and brightest minds in the industry. I'm your host, Michael Underhill. I head up the developer consultancy team here at MTM. And I'm joined today by Thomas Jung.
Thanks for having me on. I work for SAP, the large ERP software vendor, and I lead the developer advocacy and developer relations unit at SAP. Out there doing everything we can to help developers in our ecosystem, our customers, our partners, and even our own employees who are developers learn everything they can about the latest developer techniques used in the SAP ecosystem.
We'd love to dig into so much of that in a bit more detail in a second. But before we begin, we typically like to start each episode of Byte Club with just a series of kind of quick fire questions. So the eternal debate, spaces or tabs?
Doesn't matter because tooling will convert it for you, particularly AI tooling these days.
Very good answer. What did you want to be when you grew up?
When I was real little, I wanted to be a pastry chef.
Co-pilot, fad or game changer?
Both?
Most irrational fear?
I was going to say spiders, but I don't think that's necessarily irrational.
If you could only have 3 apps on your phone, what would they be?
Outlook, Slack. There's a Disney game that I play every day.
Very nice. VR or AR?
Both make me a bit motion sick, to be honest.
Okay.
But I like the idea of AR a lot, but even that makes me motion sick, unfortunately.
Sure. What book do you own but have never read?
I don't know if I own one that I've never read. I usually don't buy a book unless I intend to read it.
You're a much better person than I am. Dark mode or light mode?
Dark mode.
And finally, seeing as you've just spent some time in Vegas, which of these is the ultimate Vegas classic? Ocean's 11 or The Hangover?
Ocean's 11, largely because my team actually used that as a theme for a keynote presentation a couple years ago. So we really had a lot of fun with it and watched it many times to prepare.
It is a classic.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of a heist movie. Well, thank you so much for that and that quick little intro. You mentioned SAP, one of the big ERP platforms globally. One of the big shifts in the last sort of 5-10 years, of course, has been this kind of move away from on-prem and towards cloud deployment. How has that sort of impacted the work that SAP has done, the impact that it's had on your customer base, and also kind of more specifically with your hat on, how has that changed the work that developers have had to do when it comes to sort of integrating SAP and making sure it's working as efficiently and effectively as they want it to? Nice big and easy question to start things off.
Yeah. I mean, it's had a really big impact in multiple different ways because, moving to the cloud, is a change in infrastructure, obviously, but a change in concepts because now we move towards software as a service and multi-tenancy. And these are pieces of software that run corporations' most sensitive operations and most important data for the most part. And there's a lot of reluctance to want to, even today, to put that in the cloud or put that in any kind of shared environment in the cloud. So that has had a really big impact. But at the same time, new opportunities, it's always been, if you want to extend the software, you've got to do it in that piece of software. And that's been a real challenge for us over the years of our customer base staying up to date because of the effort that it takes to do annual upgrades or things like that. But in the cloud, we can begin to separate those two things and actually, put customer extensions on a completely separate piece of technology than what the application runs on itself. And although that's a big effort to upskill people of how to do that, that really opens up opportunities. You mentioned the conference that we were at this week in Las Vegas. That was the number one conversation piece. Even as big as AI is, the number one thing people were talking about is how can I use the cloud to do extensions and modifications and things like that and not do it in software, in app.
You mentioned there the effort around kind of annual upgrades and so on and so forth. I mean, in my head, the typical SAP customer is is pretty big. It's
Yeah.
it's the E in ERP, right? Does that pose its own set of challenges when compared to sort of working with other sort of customer sizes?
Yeah, I mean, well, the first thing is backwards compatibility.
Mm.
Look at the long-term support lifetime on something like Node.js, 2-3 years. Long-term support of a SAP enterprise software is more like 15 years. So it's a very long life cycle. Although we release annual upgrades, or in the cloud now, quarterly or monthly upgrades, customers may not adopt them for a decade or more.
Yeah.
And we have to be able to support that long lifespan, and on the other side, though, when we look at like our technology platform, we have customers that have created custom IP 20, 30 years ago, and that same piece of code is still running today and still secure. Maybe they haven't touched it, maybe they haven't changed it in 20 or 30 years. They're still getting value out of it. So that's both a blessing and a curse to be able to have such a long tail and get value out of it for so long. But at the same time, then there's a tendency to fall behind when it comes to newer technologies. How do you integrate AI or cloud computing into a software base that's 20 years old? It's just not feasible.
One of the kind of typical and sort of a common conversation that we have quite a lot with developers, there's so much new that's always happening. 5 years ago or 4 years ago, it was the metaverse. Then 3 years ago, it was crypto. And then the last couple of years, it's all been AI. And then who knows what it'll be in 2026, 2027. Yeah. How do you think about the sort of the technologies that'll stick? How do you think about kind of, right, this is definitely something that we need to be thinking about for our customer base because it is something that they will still be thinking about in 10, 15 years' time?
What we need for the customer base isn't all that different. If we look at merging AI and how that's going to impact our customer base, analyzing what they need isn't that different, but it's then how to fit it into, like I said, where our customer base is, and often many years behind. You can't only talk about the feature in the latest release because that could be years away for our customer base. And when we talk to developers in particular, they aren't the ones making these upgrade decisions. It isn't like I can go and upgrade a development tool on my laptop. That's my decision, right? I can pull down the latest update from Microsoft or whoever at any time. But this is something that the whole corporation has to agree upon to go through this upgrade cycle of your enterprise backbone. So the developer doesn't have any say in that, or very little say. And they may be dying to upgrade to get some technological feature, and they're waiting for the accounting department to give them the okay to do that. It's a very different scenario. You have to figure out how to provide value to the customer, even if they haven't upgraded the core software itself. Delivering technological functionality alongside that base. We talk a lot about side-by-side extensibility as opposed to in-app extensibility. How can you build alongside that software and not touch it, but yet still inject something new like AI?
You started this by talking about when it comes to sort of new innovations, it's no different to anything else. Like, what are those questions that you ask yourselves when it comes to sort of new tech, and how do you think about embedding stuff into your customers' workflows? Like,
not every technology fits this use case. There's a certain business use case, and sometimes a cool technology like VR or AR will come along, and we'll really want to try to put it into the enterprise space. But then, does it make sense? Are you really going to sit in a meeting with goggles on all day long? Are you better off running a report with that experience? And sometimes something will make for a really excellent demo or look really good in a keynote. But then when you think, all right, the person on the shop floor or in the warehouse, are they really going to put this thing on and use it every day? So you got to bring it back down to, can it really be used in the day-to-day environment? And does it fit with the business? And does it fit into this challenge of sometimes older technology in the backbone? Can it be retrofitted into that? You convince the business to also invest. It's not just about selling it to the technologist, the developer or the architect, you also have to convince the CIO and the CFO and that level to sign off on something like this because it touches all parts of the business. You have to check all those boxes before you can go with them.
It's so interesting. And as you say, that is the same whether it's AI, a database or cloud.
Yeah, or NFTs. A couple of years ago, we were trying to figure out if there was a place for NFTs in this space, and that was another one that kind of like, it's cool technology, but it just doesn't work into the enterprise that much.
Yeah, no, understood. I've been sort of dancing around AI and ML a little bit already. I've read all about Joule and all this sort of stuff. But how is SAP thinking about AI and ML in the context of everything that we've just described? Integration, addressing business needs, making sure it's something that people are going to be using day in, day out, convincing leadership that it's something that's worth investing in. How are you thinking about AI and ML in that context?
We're kind of taking a page out of our history. And if you looked at architecturally how we designed our software even 20, 30 years ago, there's multiple database vendors out there. Mm-hmm. So what did we do? We built a database abstraction layer so that our application could run on a bunch of different databases. Same with the operating systems, And now we're taking the same approach with AI. We built an abstraction AI layer that we call AI Core that then can connect to and run on top of many different large language models, many different infrastructures. Mm-hmm. And that's allow us to actually, you mentioned Joule. That's just the brand name for our agent experience, right? Or AI experience. Behind that is multiple large language models. And depending upon what you ask, if you ask a business question or if you're a developer asking generate the code for, to solve this business problem, we redirect that to different large language models behind the scenes. You don't as a user experience that because we found some are better tuned for like code generation and others are better tuned for natural language processing, and some are cheaper than others, and we can mix and match those. So that's the technology approach that we've taken is let's abstract all these different things and make it easy to mix and match them. But also then from the business side, we made a decision early on. We weren't going to try to create our own large language model. Mm-hmm. We were going to take industry standard, but really lean into RAG, the retrieval augmented generation, and injecting our business IP in at that layer. And that keeps it from going out into the general model, which is a good business decision for us, but makes it accessible to our customers and partners. And taking all that knowledge about our software, the industries that we specialize in, and all the years of business rules, and being able to inject that and combine that with all the general knowledge that's there in the underlying model. And that's been the approach that we've taken. And the thing that you pay SAP for when you use our AI is both security, because we don't send your data out the large language model. It's, again, injected on the fly. And the ability to train it with your business data that also doesn't go back into the general model. Because the same way we don't want our IP going back into the general model, our customers don't want their business-specific IP going back in there because they don't want their competitors to take advantage of it.
I had that in the back of my head from the minute that you said sensitive data at the start of this call. I was just like, if there's anyone that's got payroll data, HR data, business sensitivities just up the wazoo, it is SAP.
Yeah. You want your employees to get answers from the AI with that, but not let that leak outside your enterprise. That's been our focus of how do we take the large language models that are industry standard and make that a possibility.
From where I sit, it feels like there's this balance between, for organizations, particularly operating at enterprise scale, there's this balance between how can we be using kind of AI and ML more efficiently, tools like Joule, to help us write code better, help us get access to data more efficiently, etc. Mm-hmm. You could maybe call that a bit more of the sort of the generative AI space. And then there's a bit more of the kind of old school ML type thing of like, how can we be using our data more effectively to, again, probably drive efficiencies, come up with new ideas and new ways of doing things, connecting the dots in a better way. A lot of organizations have been thinking about ML for several years now.
Mm-hmm.
But there's certainly the recent interest in the last couple of years has really spurred on a kind of in Gen AI has really kind of spurred on this interest in ML more broadly. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's something that you've seen amongst your customer base, or and how you've been sort of thinking about that side of
We
the
do.
scales.
We do these little free workshops for developers in our ecosystem that we call code jams. And we actually had an ML code jam already existing, before sort of the AI craze, right? But then we saw this spike in request for the ML one, which, like you said, is a little different. It's not generative AI, it's not natural language necessarily. It's much more data science and mass data processing. But we've seen this real spike in this functionality that's not new. We've had these algorithms in place for a while, but now people are reading about it, more interested in it. And I think it's just opened the door to so many more people being able to access that. And the interesting thing is now we're using generative AI tools to make it easier to code and create things with ML, that you don't have to be a data scientist to access those deep algorithms. And I think that's starting to bridge the gap for our user base, because in the enterprise world, you don't have access to a lot of data scientists. You have a lot of data,
Yeah.
but you don't necessarily, it's a luxury for a corporation, they're in their IT shop, to have a data scientist. Yeah. And now if we can take the average IT person, who doesn't have a statistics and data science background, and make ML accessible through code generation and generative AI, that's what we're starting to see. Is, we're seeing the person who is the average report writer. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Creates the accounting reports and stuff like that. They're now coming to learn ML and doing deeper analysis.
The citizen developer, the citizen ML engineer.
Yeah, the citizen ML engineer, who's the traditional developer. I wouldn't go as far as to say citizen developer, because then people often think, oh, that's the person who can do Excel. I think there's still more of a gap there that we haven't quite closed. It's a spectrum, right?
Sure.
The really hardcore scientist, that understands all the algorithms and how they work. The person who can code but didn't specialize in those algorithms.
Yeah.
That's where we're bridging.
Gotcha. We talked a bit of this idea of the citizen developer. How do you see that role changing? Do you see that role evolving in any way? I mean, can that be sort of turbocharged by Gen AI?
Yeah, definitely. In the enterprise space, we've always kind of had a special role for what we now in the industry call the citizen developer. We had a name for business process expert, BPX, a few years ago. Sometimes they're referred to as people who work in the IMG for us, because that's actually the transaction code in old school SAP /N. And then you go to the implementation guide, is what we called it. These are people like in my experience, you'd pull them out of the business. These were the people who would lead the testing or ask the most questions when you're implementing the software, and you teach them a little bit more about the technology so that maybe they can create their own reports, the ones that are signing off on the validation, the business validation of the testing before you go live. And these are the people that we're now able to give AI tools to and do things like create their own ad hoc reports easier, better, more powerful. They were using Excel or they were using some other report writer before, but now we can give them even more capabilities through AI. So yeah, that's exciting. I think as developers, anytime we can give the less interesting work to somebody else to do so that we can focus on, the really nerdy stuff that's more fun to do, we love it, right?
For sure. You mentioned Copilot as being both a fad and a game changer. Do you think we'll get a definite answer to that anytime soon, or will it sort of continue to be both?
No, it'll continue to be both, because marketing people will continue to overhype. No matter how much capability there is, the industry, all players, will continue to overpromise, and keynote demos will continue to be mocked and everything.
Yeah.
We all do it.
Yeah.
But then the reality is not a zero. The reality is there's amazing stuff there, but unfortunately, not always the same amazing stuff that's being promised. I see that in everybody's demos. We'll do an amazing keynote demo, even my team, and then we'll go to a session afterwards and we'll tell the developers what you could actually do with it today. Because there's vision that's 2 years away, that's hype, and maybe we'll make it. And then there's what you can do today, and they're both amazing, but there's a gap. That's the reality that I think we live in here. Got to keep Wall Street happy too, right?
For sure.
But that doesn't mean there aren't some really amazing things out there. I was blown away by a demo that I did on the fly this week. We were showing how you can ask AI to analyze code and explain it back to you. And I think that's one of the things that it does really well. A little less on the whole generation of code, because that's hit and miss still across the industry, but explaining existing code does really well. We were having fun. We said, explain the code to me like I'm a pirate. So we could get it to explain it to you, not just in pirate speech, but it actually did a really good analogy of like, your database tables are ships and you need to load them with cargo, and that's your data.
Yeah.
That was kind of fun. But then we said, explain it to me like I'm a developer in the SAP ecosystem from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Not only did it explain the code, but it explained what parts of it were delta from what you would know if, say, you hadn't kept your skills up to date.
Yeah.
I was really impressed by how it was able to break that down for the developer. So the new developer, the developer who hasn't kept their skills up to date, they tell AI that, and it can bridge that gap to them. And that's great. Stuff like that. We don't see that in a keynote demo, but that was like, whoa, that's really important that it can do that.
Particularly for a platform like SAP, where elements
we have a long tail.
Yeah. What else do you see that's sort of coming around the corner that's going to impact the world of enterprise or of ERP?
We're never on the bleeding edge of things in the ERP world. We're eyeing quantum computing out of the corner of our eye, wondering how that's going to play into things. That's probably not a year or two away overall, but that's exciting stuff. I mean, that's like the next major generational leap. So, we are looking at that to say, well, what kind of impact might that have if we all of a sudden have a different level of computing power?
Yeah.
But does that even apply to the kinds of data that we're processing?
Yeah.
So that's a big question mark. I think AI, not the hype, the AI train again, but this is going to continue to evolve. A year ago, would we have guessed that agents were going to come along and start to chain these things together? No, so that's like a new thing this year, or an emerging thing built on top of where we were with AI. And I think for the next couple of years, we're going to see those sort of incremental things that add on to that experience or that grow out of it. That's what's going to impact us over the next couple of years.
Yeah. With SAP, it can touch on so many different parts of an organization that agent piece feels particularly important, or?
Yeah. And for us, different pieces of software, whether that's our own, or now we're building agents that cross over between Microsoft Office and our software, with a partnership with Microsoft. And it makes a lot of sense because everybody working in the corporate environment is using Office and an ERP software and an HR software, right? Yeah. And the two go very hand in hand, although they're two different pieces of software.
Yeah.
Why should I not be able to ask a question of an AI and it pull data from two of those things?
Yeah.
That's where things are going now. Will that work itself into the operating system? Will that work itself into the mobile experience? I think we'll see that. Will you be asking Siri a question a year from now and it answer with data from a back-end ERP system? Yeah, I think it probably will.
It's such an exciting time to be working in this in this industry.
Yeah,
I'd love to maybe just change tack a bit, and I can see on your shirt the words developer advocate. How does that differ working for a platform like SAP with its own language? It's an entire ecosystem. I guess in some respects a different ecosystem to say iOS ecosystem or to the the Microsoft ecosystem. Sort of, what do you see as some of those key differences, key challenges, or opportunities?
It is different. And I talk to colleagues, it's wonderful to be able to talk to or hear from colleagues that work in different parts of the industry. Developer advocacy or developer relations can be very different. There's developer relations and advocacy where you're trying to sell a developer product or grow an ecosystem through adoption of that product. Ours is different. When I talk to a developer, there's no purchasing decision involved there. Their company has already bought SAP, or I wouldn't be talking to them. And so there's no convincing them to use the product. They have it. There's no adoption, of, again, choosing to use the product. So we focus on awareness of the new things, because going back to that backwards compatibility, developers in our ecosystem can get really stuck in one place. Something works and then you stick with it. That's good to some extent, but eventually you need to be aware that there are newer, better ways to do things. So we spend a lot of our energy just awareness of the new things and then helping them adopt those new technologies. It's nice because it relieves some of the pressure on us as developer relations, developer advocacy, not to be chasing pipeline. I don't have to distinguish between customers and partners. I kind of treat them the same because our partner ecosystem is largely consulting firms that help customers implement the software. So it simplifies a little bit of who our target audience is. But yet we face the unique challenges of that. Again, that really long tail, that backwards compatibility, it already works. We talk about the new developer experience that we introduced 15 years ago. That we're still trying to get our developer base to adopt, and it's still new to them. So in the rest of the ecosystem, a 15-year-old piece of software certainly wouldn't be considered new, but it is for us.
In the world of SAP, there's maybe kind of three definitions of new then. There's kind of the new platform that was introduced 15 years ago. There's the new stuff that you introduced, this week in Vegas or, very recently. And then there's also stuff, because it's such an extensive platform, there's stuff that's, been around forever that is new to the developer. And they just haven't encountered before. It might just be the right thing for them at that time that they should be thinking about. Do you see that as part of your role as well, of just like introducing them to,
That's a big part of the role. We do a weekly news program on our YouTube channel. And, because we got feedback from our developer base, we just can't keep up. So we do a 5-minute, show each week that we put out as a podcast, a video, and written, just to help people keep up with new announcements, new releases, things like that, because people are just so overwhelmed. And it's hard. You go to work, you're in a corporate mindset. I've got a thing, a bunch of stuff I got to deliver. I don't even have time to also find out what's going on in the outside world. People kind of become a little myopic and a little tunnel vision on their world, their corporation, and this helps. So we put a lot of energy into making it, not only putting it out there, but make sure it's really easy to consume. On the drive home, or on the lunch break. That's where we have to fit our messaging in. We don't get a big bang audience that is going to show up and listen all the time.
It feels like a key challenge. I mean, what do you find is working? Like, what's resonating with developers? Is it the podcast? Is it the short form videos? Is it the partnership that you have with Devfluencers? What works?
It is different things, and that we're finding, particularly generational gaps, require different things. We see it not to stereotype, but we see it in the analytics behind these things. That younger developers want shorter form content pushed to them in a multi-platform way, that they can get on their mobile and different ways, the same content. Some days it's a podcast, some days it's video. But it does tend to be those two. Whereas an older segment of the developer audience, again, not to stereotype, but just based upon analytics, tend to want written content. And that means us as, a developer relations, developer advocacy, we have to produce the same content in multiple channels and multiple formats to really meet the needs of all those. And that's been the key is how do we produce multi-channel without driving ourselves crazy with maintaining that as well. But
for sure.
But we have the numbers to back it up. And, we saw good increases in younger developers when we started going more multi-channel. We saw good increases in the percentage of female developers, which is a challenge our industry has overall with attracting particularly women. Hasn't been, as accepting or as easy to break in. The enterprise space, particularly bad, I think, at that. It used to be you would go to events 15 years ago, it was all men. And now we see a better mix. And I think it's there we've also, like my team, we've tried to representation, having a variety of voices and mentors in the industry, seeing developer advocates that are of different races and different genders has helped, I think, bring more people in and give them a voice as well. And that's been important.
It's so crucial. On the sort of idea of impact, you mentioned that, you're quite lucky and you feel kind of lucky in that you're not working in a team that is measured by kind of sales. And they're like, how do you think about measuring impact then? What are some of those kind of those metrics that you're looking at? And when you bring up your analytics dashboard, like what are you looking at?
We are looking at adoption and adoption of specific features. That's actually one of the beauties of cloud computing is we can see adoption of specific features because, we're hosting all the software. We aren't just shipping it and then not knowing how people are using it. Because they're running it on our hosted platforms, we can exactly see which buttons people are pressing. And that really helps a lot to know how satisfied people are with the software, how well it's working for them. If they stop using a certain wizard, then we know there's something wrong with it. So that's the kind of thing that we look at down to the individual feature level for developers. In the IDE, in the programming language, which syntax are they using? Which are they adopting? Why aren't they adopting? Then we start asking the question, why aren't they adopting it? And we start talking face to face with the developers about that. That's largely how we're measured, down to specific things. Like this year is a big drive to help get customers on the latest release of our flagship product. So we're going to really look at the developer tools that help with updating code to the latest release.
How do you see the role of developer advocacy, how do you see that changing? We've talked about kind of having to spread out the message across more platforms. What else is down the line?
I mean, that's changed a lot. During COVID, we went a lot with one-to-many online content, but then we've had to bring back in person. That did not go away. And people are hungry for that different kind of experience you get. Being at an event just this last week and the hallway conversations and the evening conversations, during workshops, the one-on-one questions that you answer, that's hard to replicate or replace in any kind of online experience. So we also have to figure out how to do both of those things sometimes at the same time. While we're at an in-person event, we were also recording the news program for this week that goes out to many people around the world. And how do you make the people that aren't at the in-person event feel a little bit a part of that, or still get part of the messaging that was at that in-person event? That's what we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to do. How to bridge contests. We try to do things with fun contests. How do you bridge them so that even the awards that you give away at the contest, like we like to give away all expense paid trips to our annual technical education event. We have one big technical education event a year and we rotate it around the world, but how can we give away 10 winners. But then what do we do in those regions when somebody wins, but it's even not economically or feasible for them to get a visa to come to another country? Even if we pay all their travel expenses, they can't get the visa to travel. But how can we still reward them? These are things that are hard to tackle when you start thinking globally. It sounds easy. Oh, we'll just give away a trip. It's actually not that easy. Or how do they pay taxes on the benefit of that? That gets very complicated in some regions. So we spend a lot of time trying to solve those problems and make it fair and make it work around the world.
On that note, I wanted to sort of touch on maybe just the physical and digital aspect. It's been great to sort of to chat over a platform like Zoom that has facilitated exactly this sort of conversation, but it takes away the joy of being able to give you a thank you Byte Club mug in person. So what we will do is send you one of these in the post just to say thank you so much for your time with us today. It's been really great to meet you and to hear your thoughts about all things enterprise, all things software, all things AI, and all things developer relations and advocacy. So thank you so much, Thomas, for your time today. It's been really great.
Well, thank you. And I really enjoyed the podcast, the discussions that have taken place in the past, and it was great to be able to be a part of one.
Great.